Hi, I'm MacKenzie Fegan, and this is 112BK coming to you from downtown Brooklyn. On the show today, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we'll talk with DJ Zeke Thomas about his own experience.
It's a feeling almost of abandonment, and it's not even a feeling of wanting to be heard. It's a feeling of wanting to be believed.
According to the CDC, 1 in 3 women in the U.S. will experience some form of contact sexual violence in their lifetime. That term, contact sexual violence, includes rape, sexual coercion, and unwanted sexual contact. 1 in 3. While we're beginning to have more awareness about the scale of this problem, there's something else that we're still not talking about, and that's that men are victims of sexual assault as well. 1 in 6 men will experience contact sexual violence over the course of his lifetime. We rarely hear their voices, which is why our next guest is doing such important work by speaking out about his own story. Zeke Thomas, DJ, advocate, and son of Basketball Hall of Famer Isiah Thomas, is the first male spokesperson for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and he joined us recently here at 112BK. A note to our viewers and listeners, in this interview we talk about rape and sexual assault. Zeke, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So did you see that Dwayne Wade's son came out this weekend?
That was amazing. Do you believe that he came out or was just attending the parade?
I mean, he's 11, right? And so he didn't come out and say anything about his identity, but the tweets were like, my whole family is at South Beach Pride supporting
I just thought
Zion.
It was amazing that, we're at a place in this country now, and especially the NBA. The NBA, my dad obviously being an ex-NBA player and still involved in the league, definitely as a commentator and just loving the league. My family always supported me, maybe not in a visual social media sense, just because it wasn't in existence yet.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned your dad, Isiah Thomas, New York Knicks, famously. What was it like when you came out? How old were you? What was the response from your family like?
So when I came out, I was, I'd say, about 20 years old, give or take a couple months. I always choose to do things around my birthday, so I'm always trying to decide, am I 20 or am I 21 at the time?
Right. I think that's true, though. Birthdays, mark an important passage of time for people.
Exactly.
And they're like, well, might as well come out or upend my life or, whatever the thing is.
I believe when you come out as a gay man or just identifying yourself growing up, it presents new challenges that you didn't know existed before. Growing up, as a kid, you don't really realize your race or you're different until somebody tells you, oh, you're black and this is what happened to you in the past. Or you're Latina and this is what happened to you, and so forth and so on. Or you're white and now you have white privilege. And what is that? But as a kid, you don't realize these things. So now when you're growing up, okay, you're black. Okay, that's one strike against me, so to speak, or something that I now have to learn to navigate. So now you're identifying gay. So now basically you have 2 minority strikes against you that you now have to identify with and figure out. So that, to me, was the interesting part of what I now had to figure out.
I think that's so true. And I think specifically with coming out, because it is something that you can stay closeted about as opposed to your race, which unless you can pass, you can't stay closeted about.
Exactly. I always joke with my friend, my friend who always is like, well, I'm kind of biracial. I can kind of go either way. I'm like, well, what happens when you get arrested? You're black.
Right. Exactly. Who do they think you are?
Right? Who do they think you are?
They definitely want to listen to you discourse about well, actually, my racial identity is complex until they're stopping and frisking you.
Exactly.
So we're here also because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and you have come out in such a brave way and talked about your own experience. Will you tell us a little bit about what happened to you?
So, unfortunately, when I was 12 years old, I was sexually assaulted by members of my AAU basketball team. And then again, when I was 27 years old, by a gentleman who I actually had gone on a date previously with. So these were 2 situations where I essentially knew the person and people who assaulted me and raped me. These were definitely two events in my life that I didn't realize how big effect they had, especially the one that happened when I was 12. It was kind of something that I didn't comprehend, even as myself, what had happened. And then telling people about it years later, it was definitely something like, whoa, that happened? And definitely there were parents that reached out even to my parents who were like, we didn't know, we didn't know. My parents were definitely upset. Just like everybody was upset and concerned about me. But then going forward, it was like, okay, now what do we do? Because I was hiding these things. I was still hiding that these things had happened to me. As a 27-year-old man, I'm going around saying everything's okay, but clearly my house was on fire. A lot of my friends were like, your behavior was very erratic. You were doing things that didn't make sense, saying things that didn't make sense. You were just all over the place. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know how to approach you about it. And that's something that I hear a lot of survivors saying, that a lot of their friends or family members, that they felt abandoned. And I really have been playing with this most recently in my head and through therapy and stuff. I don't believe it's a feeling almost of abandonment. And it's not even a feeling of wanting to be heard. It's a feeling of wanting to be believed. I just wanted a hug. Mm-hmm. Other people, they want a conversation with their actual perpetrator or rapist or assaulter. Those were the things that were hard to navigate, as opposed to, okay, I made this decision for me. Now it's affected so many others. It's affected so many others in a way that, okay, now my friends and my family basically are reliving my rape anytime I do an interview like this, anytime I talk about it. That is my identity, one of my roles that I have decided to take in terms of activism. But then for me, it was, okay, Joshua, Zeke Thomas, you have now decided to step into this activism path. But are you ready for it? And at the time, I don't believe I was. And I had to learn a lot of information, and I had to learn a lot about myself. And in learning about myself, I'm now able to step into the role and call myself an activist.
I mean, it's such an act of bravery to come forward publicly, especially when you yourself are a public figure. And as you mentioned, people aren't believed. Women talk about this all the time, especially if they knew their accuser, coming forward, people being like, well, was that rape? Was that sexual assault? And even Terry Crews, right, who famously came out and was like, look, I'm a professional athlete, and I was groped in public by another man. And the things that were said to him were just reprehensible. You had D.L. Hughley saying, God gave you muscles so you could say no and mean it, which is just so toxic.
Yes.
What do you say about that? And were you afraid that you would be facing the type of victim blaming that we see all the time?
Well, I did. I definitely did face victim blaming. There were people like me. I mean, I'm not the size of Terry Crews, but I'm still a 6'1", physically fit man who definitely is capable of defending himself. But when you're faced with an assault or a trauma, generally the first reaction of any animal, and I always give this comparison because we've all seen a deer or a rabbit in our yard or walking around. When you see that, the first instinct of the animal isn't to run away, it's they freeze. They literally freeze, and generally that is a human being's first response to devastating news. They freeze, or an attack, they freeze. But in talking about, Terry Crews and D.L. Hughley and women who aren't believed, it's such a complexity that we're able to have this great conversation now, today, and so many people are having it. But the hardest part now is, okay, what are these things? And we are going to have now a hard conversation in defining these things.
So the first step is sort of not being believed, right? People saying, oh, she's lying, he's lying. The second step I see as people being like, all right, well, maybe that is true. Like maybe there was a sexual assault, but she was asking for it. And in the case of women, this is often like, well, what was she doing out at 2 p.m, drinking martinis and wearing a short skirt? And in the case of men, this is often, oh, well, gay men are promiscuous. Gay men are using apps where they're going out and looking for sex. What do you say to people who are, again, blaming the victim?
I don't believe that anybody anywhere is ever looking for a rape or an assault. What you have to learn to realize as just a person, as just a human being, is that, yeah, when you put yourself in situations, if you're drunk at 4 a.m. stumbling around, you're either going to get arrested, maybe mugged, or worse. It's not just something that, is a new thing. Sexual assault and rape are hard things to digest. But other crimes do happen at these same things when people are impaired or when people are making bad judgment.
Right. And I think that that's why it's so important for us to be teaching kids about consent, right? Where it's like, it doesn't matter what she's wearing or what he's wearing. Consent is paramount. And you don't get to touch, you don't get to do anything unless that person gives affirmative vocal consent. And also they can withdraw that consent.
100%. They can withdraw that consent at any time. You can say no at any time. You can pull away at any time. You could literally push away at any time if you need to.
I also feel like so much of this has to do with slut shaming, right? Where it's like, if somebody is promiscuous, if somebody does like to go out and have sex using apps, that if they then fall victim to a sexual assault, there's this idea of like, oh, well, the other 5 times they wanted it, and so what, this last time they didn't want it.
We have such a taboo. It's really is the last frontier of humans that we will not talk about it. It's something that we've been doing since Adam and Eve, or whoever you believe to be the first humans to walk this earth. It's something that's not going away. Sex is not going away as long as we want to stay on this planet.
Right.
Generally, everybody who has sex, whether it's today or they've had sex a million times before, each occurrence, you're all just trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure out what he's thinking, what she's thinking, what they are thinking. You're trying to figure out.
And you know how you can figure that out?
Don't know.
By asking each other and by replying in a consensual fashion.
And it's
mind read.
Uncomfortable to do, but it's the right thing to do.
Right. Yeah, and we have to, I think, move beyond thinking that that's not sexy.
Correct.
To ask someone, is this what you want?
But that's also something that we have to know. It's mental health. It's just general communication of asking the uncomfortable. People are afraid to ask the uncomfortable, but really at the end of the day, it's a yes or no that you're going to get, and nothing's going to change from where you are currently.
Can I ask, you knew your rapist. Did you press charges? Did you go to the police?
Now, unfortunately, rapists generally are smart. That's something that, criminals are smart. Criminals have done this before. They know how to take advantage of people. They make you feel comfortable. The gentleman then deleted his profile on Grindr where we met. He had actually given me a fake number, whether that was a Google Voice account or just, any app you can download a second phone number. So he basically disappeared. Mm-hmm. And it was no use to find him in terms of hiring a private investigator and whatever. However, law enforcement did say more than not frequently these people get caught. Eventually, somebody makes a report and is able to track them down. Mm-hmm. Now, when I went to talk to law enforcement or even the private investigator who I talked to, and I gave the description, you're describing pretty much every white male in America. So who are we really looking for? Do we even know if his name was his actual name? I knew his number wasn't his actual number. I knew he deleted his Grindr. Do I even know his real name? It was those things that were so hard to accept that I'm probably not going to be able to press charges against this man. However, I'm so happy that many are able and strong enough to go through the justice system. But again, legislatively, we have to change these things. Most times a victim, when they first call the police, they have to make a statement, and they normally make that statement to the police. Then they have to make a statement to the district attorney. Then they have to probably make another statement to an investigator who's now going to investigate that crime. Then they have to probably make a statement to the perpetrator's investigator, and now you have to make a statement in front of the judge. So now you've made 5 statements, and you're reliving that trauma while you're also trying to heal at the same time.
And that's in addition
then
to
you gotta
submitting
go
to a rape
court.
kit.
Yeah, then you got to go to court. Then you got to go to the hospital. It is a hard, big ordeal. And actually, Safe Horizon here in the Bronx, New York, actually does a great job. Their facility actually is pretty much a one-stop shop for victims. They have a video camera there. They have a district attorney there. They have a police station there. So it's pretty much the person giving the statement once and being able to move on. And I wish more cities nationwide would follow Safe Horizon's lead into tackling that issue. There's so many issues that we can tackle around sexual assault, around mental health awareness, to make things easier for victims of massive traumas to get help.
Absolutely. That pathway to seeking justice is so difficult, and we don't need to make it even more difficult by, say, not testing rape kits.
And I mean, even at the beginning, I mean, if you then put the layer of, the suspiciousness of the criminal justice system or law enforcement, whether that's you're a Black person, a Latina person, a gay person, an Asian person, the stereotypes of not anti-police, but being suspicious of the police, of the legal system, those things don't just go away because now you need help.
Right. Yes, I'm thinking specifically, too, about the police don't have a great relationship with either Black men or the LGBT community. And so to then have to say, I am relying on you to believe me and to not victim blame or any of these things.
And especially in a very toxic masculine that is the police force. Most police officers are great cops and do a great job, but most police officers probably have never heard of a man coming to them that might have been the first man coming to them saying, I was raped. Right. And that man might even be bigger than them. And now they're we're all human beings trying to now justify this thing that is just coming to light over, when I gave my interview on Good Morning America, the Me Too movement had been founded and started. It didn't catch steam, however, until December of that same year. It literally was an anomaly. I was one of the first people to come out, and then this whole thing just caught fire. And its changes are happening. But that's one of the things that I point to is that, I did this in April, and it was deemed, this is weird to talk about. Then Me Too hit in December, and it was like, whoa, we got to talk about it. And now we're at the point where we can talk about, okay, how do we fix this broken system?
I'm so glad you brought up toxic masculinity, too, because I think all roads lead back to it, right? Mm-hmm. Both in terms of the people who commit assaults, probably coming from a place of toxic masculinity, but also our perception of men who have been insulted is so informed by our notions of what it means to be a man and why didn't you fight back? And how can this be that a 6'1" man is saying that he himself was victimized? What are some ways that you think that we can go about breaking down notions about masculinity and what it means to be a man?
Well, going back to Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, I mean, that right there, that statement, what he did, how small it was, just to acknowledge, I love my child, That's the simple thing that he did was that I love my child. But that wouldn't have been done 5 years ago, 10 years ago by some NBA basketball players, some athletes. And I grew up in athletics, and I've met gay players, but it was very closed in quarters, very protected. And just in talking about the Black experience, talking about the Black family, it's very much a patriarchy or matriarchy system in terms of who do we look up to, who's the elder in our group, in our family, in our church, in our whatever. And if they are saying, I don't really know about this, or this is absolutely wrong, then that's pushed down. And whether you believe it or not, that's what you have to conform to.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back and talk about your first sexual assault? Because I think one that made the headlines, for better or for worse, right, was the one that happened, the rape that happened when you were 27. But when you were 12, you were on a athletic trip with your teammates, right? And I think that this is an incident that many people in a previous era might have written off, or maybe even in this era, would have written off as boys will be boys, or like, this is just bullying that got out of hand. Can you talk a little bit about how we need to reframe what happened to you?
Well, it's amazing when you use the phrase "boys will be boys." It takes me back to Jerry Sandusky and Joe Paterno basically being the patriarchal figure in that Penn State case of basically saying, I don't get this, I don't understand this, this is too much for me, boys will be boys, whatever. But Jerry Sandusky was raping these young men, these football players. And I got assaulted by 3-4 members of my team that I was forced to perform oral sex on them.
Were they all your peers, your same age?
Slightly older.
Okay.
I'd say 14, 15. I was 12. But it's just amazing that people forget what it's like to just have something taken away from you. You know, whether that is a parent, whether that is, you know, you got in a massive car accident, or you no longer have the ability to hear. Something was just taken away from you. And in that moment, my innocence was taken from me. I didn't realize it at the time, but my innocence was taken away from me. And now I had a lifelong scar internally that I had to deal with.
So this month, as we mentioned, is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. What do you hope that people think about this month? What do you want them to keep in their heads?
What I want people to keep in their heads about Sexual Assault Awareness Month is that it's not a month to just focus on this issue solely. This is an issue that has been happening since the dawn of time. This is an issue that will continue to happen. We're not going to put an end to sexual assault, unfortunately. But what we can do is inform victims, inform survivors, and inform the general public of, yes, this is consent. No, this is not consent. Yes, this is sexual assault. Yes, this is rape. Yes, we understand. Yes, we believe you. Yes, we want to love and be there for you. I really want people to take from this month that therapy, and it takes time. You know what I mean? It takes a lot of time. It takes way more than a month to get over this. And that's what I want people to know. I want people to know that there are many outlets that they can use, including me. You know, I talk to people on Instagram all the time who have gone through experiences, and I'm not their therapist. I'm not, you know, there for whatever. I'm just there to say, you know what? I believe you. I'm here. Let's get through this together.
Well, we are so glad that you're here, and thank you so much for being an advocate for survivors. And maybe I'll close out with just a question about your music, because you are a DJ. You have written songs about your experience. There's one called Dealing With It.
Yes.
And I'm also curious because you're a DJ in dance music, which I think we often think of as overwhelmingly white. Like there's maybe Steve Aoki, you know, a few other people like holding it down for people of color, but like it's predominantly white. And I'm curious about your experience. And if you think that there's like crossover potential, or what you would like to see more of.
The most interesting thing about music, in a sense, is that we always like to forget what came before. You know, house music was started in Chicago, and it was really moved by Black and the LGBT community just pushing it. You know, they were called the club kids because they weren't allowed to play this music in other mainstay venues. So they were playing it in houses, in basements, and that birthed house music. And then house music in Detroit came into techno, and then you pushed it over into dance music in New York. The dance scene, the club scene, disco became the craze. But it got moved over to Europe, and the Europeans ran with it, and I really think that they've done it justice. But don't forget where it started. Just like you can't forget that R&B music and rhythm and blues started rock and roll. You can't forget that Caribbean, Jamaican toasting started hip-hop.
Right. Or country music. I'm so excited about Old Town Road, bringing country music back to some of its Black roots as well.
Correct. You can't forget these things. Now, the most amazing thing about me being an artist is that, you know, I studied classical violin and I grew up in Motown. So I love that music. My family's from Chicago, so I love house music. And when I came to New York, I got to experience dance music. And my babysitter growing up, Tracy, she always listened to rock and roll. So I was definitely a well-rounded person, and I love to just encourage people in music. Don't get so pigeonholed in your one thing that you like. I am so excited, you know, Spotify, Apple Music, you know, just friends. Hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. You know, get out of our top 100 and experience new music as much as possible.
Well, Zeke, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
No, thank you for having me.